Deep within the mist-veiled mountains of the east, there existed a forest so ancient that time itself seemed to lose its way among the towering, moss-covered cedars. This was the sacred domain of the Kodama, the ethereal spirits of the trees who had breathed life into the wood, long before the first human footprint marred the soft, damp earth. To the villagers living at the mountain's base, the forest was a living mystery, a place of whispers where every leaf was a tongue and every trunk possessed a soul. Among these villagers was a young woodcutter named Ren, whose heart was filled with a cold, restless ambition that blinded him to the sanctity of the high peaks. Ren did not believe in the old legends of spirits or mountain gods, viewing the forest not as a sanctuary, but as a vast, untapped reservoir of timber waiting to be sold. While the village elders offered salt, rice, and sake at the forest edge to appease the invisible guardians, Ren sharpened his heavy steel axe, mocking their ancient superstitions. He sought a specific prize, a gargantuan cedar known as the Great Root, which stood at the very heart of the mountain, shrouded by a veil of perpetual, silver fog. Legend whispered that the Great Root was the father of all Kodama, the central anchor that kept the mountain from crumbling into the depths of the hungry sea. One morning, as a sharp, biting wind nipped at his neck, Ren began his solitary ascent, determined to find the giant and prove his dominance over the untamed wild. As he crossed the unseen threshold into the deep woods, the air grew heavy and humid, and the sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy's dense, emerald roof. He noticed small, pale figures flickering at the corner of his eye, translucent beings with large, dark eyes and heads that rattled like dry seeds in a winter wind. They were the Kodama, watching him from the high branches with a curiosity that held no malice, only a profound and ancient sadness for the intruder. Ren swung his axe at a nearby branch just to clear his path, and a sharp, clicking sound echoed through the valley like 1,000 stones hitting glass at once. The forest suddenly went silent, a silence so absolute and heavy it felt like a physical weight, pressing against his eardrums and his very soul. Undeterred by the ominous quiet, he pushed deeper, following a trail of luminescent silver moss that glowed faintly in the deepening shadows, guiding him toward the core. Hour after hour he climbed, his breath coming in ragged gasps, until he reached a clearing where the trees stood in a perfect circle, their branches intertwined like praying hands. In the center stood the Great Root, a tree so massive its trunk looked like a fluted stone pillar of a forgotten god, reaching toward the hidden heavens. Its bark was etched with swirling patterns that resembled ancient, weeping faces, and its leaves were the color of molten silver, shimmering even in the darkness. Ren felt a momentary shiver of primal awe, but his greed quickly suppressed the feeling as he calculated the immense fortune this unique wood would bring. He stepped toward the Great Root, raising his heavy axe, but as the polished steel caught the dim light, the ground beneath his boots began to thrum with power. A soft, resonant voice, not heard with ears but felt in the very marrow of his bones, drifted through the clearing. "Why do you bring cold steel to the heart of your mother?" Ren spun around, his weapon held high in a defensive stance. But there was no one there except for the small, rattling spirits perched on every limb like white fruit. "I am here for what the world owes me. I take what I have the strength to claim," Ren shouted into the void, his voice cracking against the stillness. The largest Kodama, a figure no taller than a small child but radiating an aura of immense age and wisdom, stepped forward from the tangled roots. Its head tilted slowly, and the rattling sound it produced was rhythmic and haunting, perfectly mimicking the steady beat of a terrified human heart. "The wood does not owe, and the mountain does not give to those who do not know how to ask," the spirit whispered, its eyes like deep, dark wells of time. Ren laughed, a harsh and jagged sound that felt like a sacrilege in such a sanctified space, and he turned his back on the spirit to face the Great Root. With a grunt of desperate effort, he swung his axe with all his might, aiming for the exact center of the glowing, silver bark. The moment the blade struck the surface, a blinding flash of white light erupted, and a scream not of a man, but of the entire mountain pierced the sky. Ren was thrown backward by an invisible force. His axe shattered into 1,000 useless shards of metal that hissed as they hit the damp moss. Instead of sap, a glowing, golden essence began to weep from the jagged wound in the tree, illuminating the clearing with a mournful, dying light. The Kodama began to wail in unison, a sound like the winter wind whistling through a graveyard, and the very ground began to tremble and crack beneath them. Ren watched in mounting horror as the vibrant leaves of the Great Root turned a sickly black, and began to fall to the ground like charred, burnt paper. The vibrant green of the surrounding forest faded to a ghostly ashen gray, the life being drained away as the heart of the wood bled its lifeblood. "What have I done?" Ren whispered, the suffocating weight of his actions finally crushing the arrogance that had fueled his journey. The elder Kodama looked at him, not with the anger he expected, but with a hollow pity that hurt more than any physical blow could have. "You have severed the thread of the echo," the spirit said, its form flickering and fading as if it were about to vanish from existence. "When the Great Root dies, the voice of the mountain goes silent, and without that voice, the land itself forgets how to live and breathe. As the spirit spoke, the village far below was struck by a sudden, violent tremor, and the mountain streams began to dry into dusty, gray scars. Rin saw a sudden vision of his home, the gardens withering in seconds, the wells turning to salt, and the people he knew crying out in a thirst that had no cure. He realized then that the forest was not a resource to be harvested or conquered, but the very lungs and blood of his entire world. Desperate and weeping, he fell to his knees and clawed at the cold earth, begging the fading spirits for a way to undo the damage he had wrought. "There is no undoing what is broken," the Kodama replied solemnly. "There is only the sacrifice of a new echo to restore the ancient silence. To save the forest from total collapse, a human soul had to willingly offer its own heartbeat to mend the bleeding wound in the great root." Ren looked at his scarred hands, the hands that had brought nothing but destruction, and he knew there was only one path left for his redemption. He reached out and touched the weeping wound of the tree. Closing his eyes and focusing on the love he had once felt for the earth as a small child, he remembered the smell of the first rain on dry soil and the musical sound of the wind dancing through the high summer grass. A strange warmth began to flow from his chest into the cold tree, a slow, steady pulse that seemed to pull the golden essence back inside the bark. His own physical strength began to ebb away, his limbs growing heavy like lead and his vision blurring into a soft haze of silver and emerald green. The Kodama gathered in a circle around him, the rattling now a gentle, rhythmic lullaby that soothed his fraying and exhausted spirit. Slowly, the black, dead leaves of the great root began to glow once more, the silver life returning to their delicate veins and stems. The gray forest shivered as if waking from a nightmare, and a wave of vibrant, pulsing life washed over the mountain, restoring the canopy. Rin felt himself expanding, his consciousness becoming part of the wood, his spirit stretching deep into the roots and reaching high into the sky. He was no longer a mere woodcutter. He was becoming a witness, a silent guardian of the ancient, sacred silence of the peaks. His physical body dissolved into a soft, white mist that swirled around the massive trunk before settling permanently into the grooves of the bark. When the sun rose the next morning over the ridge, the clearing was silent once more. But it was a silence of deep peace, not of hollow death. A new Kodama stood among the roots, one with eyes that looked remarkably like a young man's, watching over the heart of the wood with love. In the village below, the dry stream suddenly burst forth with crystal clear water, and the crops stood tall and proud in the morning light. The elders looked toward the mountain peak and saw a faint, silver light shimmering in the mist, and they knew the forest had finally been healed. They began to tell stories of the ambitious woodcutter who went into the dark to find a fortune, but found his true soul instead. For generations that followed, no axe was ever raised against the trees of that mountain again, for the lesson had been etched into their history. The people learned to listen to the subtle whispers of the leaves, understanding that every tree held a story and every spirit held a memory. The Kodama remained, the rattling heads a constant, gentle reminder of the delicate and vital balance between humanity and the natural world. They became the quiet protectors of the lost and the guides for those who sought wisdom and connection instead of mere wealth. And at the center of the vast, green kingdom stood the great root, its silver leaves singing a wordless song in the high, cold winds. Within its bark, the calm face of Ren could sometimes be seen by the pure of heart, a peaceful expression etched into the living, growing wood. He had become the voice of the ancient wood, the eternal echo that reminded the world that we are all interconnected in the web of life. Travelers who wandered deep into the forest would often report hearing a gentle, melodic hum, like a man singing a lullaby to the trees. It was a song of growth, of shifting seasons, and of the eternal cycle of life that connects the smallest leaf to the most distant star. The forest flourished and expanded its borders, its roots reaching out until they touched the salty edges of the distant, crashing sea. Animals that had long been forgotten by man returned to its protective shadows, finding sanctuary under the watchful, glowing eyes of the spirits. The air remained pure and sweet, and the mountains stood firm against the most violent storms, anchored by the divine strength of the great root. The legend of the Kodama spread far and wide across the lands, a beacon of hope for a world that was beginning to forget its own roots. It taught the children that true power lies not in the ability to destroy or harvest, but in the courage to protect and nourish. It showed that even the most ambitious and greedy heart can find a path to peace when it aligns itself with the rhythm of the breathing earth. And so, the wood grew taller, and the spirits grew stronger, their collective voices creating a symphony of the unseen and the sacred. Every time a child in the valley planted a new seed, they would whisper a small prayer to the Kodama, asking for their ancient blessing. The bond between the mountain peaks and the humble valley became unbreakable, a covenant written in shades of vibrant green and shimmering gold. The darkness that had once threatened to consume Ren's restless soul was gone, replaced by a light that would never truly fade from the world. He was the bridge between the human and the divine, the sacrifice that allowed for the renewal of all living things. Even as long centuries passed and the world outside the mountain changed beyond recognition, the ancient wood remained an island of peace. Great cities rose and fell in the distance, and empires crumbled into the dust of history. But the silver leaves of the great root never lost their luster. The rattling of the Kodama could still be heard on the quietest nights, a sound that brought comfort to those who knew how to listen. It was the rhythmic sound of a living world, a world that breathed, felt, and remembered every act of kindness and every drop of blood. The mountain became a sacred place of pilgrimage for those seeking to heal their own broken and weary spirits in the modern age. They would sit quietly beneath the emerald canopy and wait for the silence to speak to them, just as it had once spoken to the woodcutter. And in that heavy silence, they would often find the answers to questions they didn't even know they were carrying in their hearts. They would come to realize that they were never truly alone in this universe, for the earth beneath their feet was alive, aware, and watching. The spirit of the woodcutter lived on in every rustle of the wind through the pines, and every crystal drop of the morning dew. He remained the eternal reminder that one single act of selflessness can ripple through eternity, changing the fate of everything it touches. The great root continued to grow toward the heavens, its branches now reaching so high they seemed to brush against the face of the moon. The Kodama danced in the long shadows of the twilight, their translucent forms glowing like fallen stars that had found a home on earth. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees, it was a living, breathing testament to the enduring power of harmony and love. It was a sovereign kingdom of whispers, where the trees were the silent kings and the spirits were the faithful keepers of the ancient law. And the law they guarded was simple: love the land as you love your own life, for in the end, you are one and the same. The echo of the ancient wood will never truly fade away, as long as there is even one soul left on this earth who is willing to listen. Listen closely the next time you find yourself walking among the old trees, for the Kodama may have a secret story just for you. Remember the woodcutter, remember his noble sacrifice, and never forget that your own voice is a vital part of the great, eternal song. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please comment, like, share, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio for more.